Welcome to this presentation from the Wisconsin First Detector Network. This video was adapted from a Wisconsin First Detector Network training session. In this video, you'll hear Paul Skawinski from UW Extension Lakes program talk about Starry Stonewort.
Starry Stonewort was another one that I wanted to talk about. This is macroalgae that lives in lakes. We have almost 24 species of macroalgae in lakes that are part of this family. They can often look much like a higher plant, a vascular plant. They can be anywhere from a couple inches tall to over 2 meters tall, so 6 feet plus, and are often mistaken for vascular plants. This is the only member of that family that is not native here. All the other ones are native. You can see just to the right of the Starry Stonewort in the center of the photo, on the right side is a native Cara species, one of the musk grasses that we have. We have 11 species of musk grasses in Wisconsin that are all native. But what you can immediately see from this photograph is that the Starry Stonewort in the center of the photo is much more robust. It's a much higher diameter, just overall a more robust species. This is a shot from Owasco Lake in New York. I was out there in the summer of 2013 looking at these types of macroalgae, doing a study on them in New York. And this is a site that this lake was not previously known to have Starry Stonewort until we went there. And this is what we saw in some of the shallow water. There's a little bit of the long ribbony leaves there are water celery. There's a little bit of Eurasian milfoil or hybrid milfoil on the upper left there, sort of bending down. And there's a couple of common waterweed species in the middle there and there. So we do have a few native plants that were still growing through this mat, but you can see it's forming a very dense mat in the shallow water area of this lake, with few species able to compete with such a dense mat. Here it is. This was actually at the same site, right at the boat landing of Owasco Lake. This is an interesting species in that it's native to Europe and it's an endangered species over there. It's really disappearing from most of the sites that it's been found at historically in Europe. So they actually actively manage sites to try to promote this species over there. And over here it just goes nuts, and we certainly don't have to do anything to help it along over here. It was first identified in 1978 in the St. Lawrence River and in lower Michigan in 1986. And apparently was pretty well behaved in lower Michigan until about 2000, when it started really showing up as this highly dominant species in lakes. They estimate over there a couple hundred lakes at least that are infested with Starry Stonewort. And they often do copper and endothal treatments in these lakes multiple times per year in order to keep this stuff down. It's very difficult to kill, and I'll get to that a little bit later. This particular species, unlike most of these macroalgae, the family Cariaceae you see on the slide there, they typically prefer a pretty specific depth range in lakes. For example, the rough stonewort tends to be in less than a foot of water. It'll go basically right up to the shoreline. Beyond that, you'll typically find the common muskgrass up until about 6 feet deep, or 8 feet maybe. And there's another species that takes over from about 8 feet down to maybe 12 or 13 feet. And then you'll find another one beyond that. And it holds true pretty well for a lot of hard water lakes especially. You can actually, just knowing the depth, you could guess which species of Cariaceae you might find in that location. With the case of Starry Stonewort, we've found it in just mere inches of water, and we've found it beyond 20 feet of water. So it will apparently grow just about anywhere. And that's one of the major reasons for concern with this species, is that it can occupy basically the entire littoral zone of a lake, the area of the lake where aquatic plants grow and a lot of young of the year fish like to hang out. A lot of the invertebrates hang out in that same area. So it's incredibly important, ecologically important area of the lake. And we don't want to see it all dominated by one species. Typically, to control this, we're using copper compounds, which is a persistent heavy metal that accumulates in the sediments, and it is toxic to a lot of different creatures. So not really something that we want to be continuously dumping into lakes and accumulating in the sediments, but at this point appears to be the most effective treatment method for Starry Stonewort. So this is another species that likes to spread by fragments of itself, much like the Eurasian milfoil and many other perennial aquatic plants. But it also produces these little structures called bulbils, which are essentially a starch reserve for the plant. And it has many different lobes on it, giving it this star-like appearance. And it can have 5, 6, or 7 lobes, but it always has some sort of a starry appearance. In the right photograph, you can see one of them that I uprooted, and it has dozens of bulbils produced on these clear threads underneath the sediment surface. You can see where the plant itself is up here, and then below the sediment surface, which would be right about where the pointer is, you can see these clear threads underneath with some organic matter from the sediments stuck to them, and all these little clumps of white, which are all these bulbils. Each bulbil can produce many different clones of the parent plant, in some cases dozens if it's a large, well-developed bulbil. So one plant can produce dozens of bulbils, and each bulbil can produce dozens of more plants, so it can really spread itself around very quickly by means of just asexual reproduction. On that note, we don't have any sexual reproduction taking place in North America. Every Starry Stonewort individual that's been observed in North America to this point has been a male. There have not been any females ever documented in North America. There are a couple of recent studies looking at Starry Stonewort very closely, especially in New York, and still there have never been any females documented in the US. So as far as we can tell, we have possibly a single population, lots of clones of one plant and very little genetic variability. We may have multiple introductions of male plants, so there may be clones of several individuals, but in any case, the genetic variability is probably pretty low, and they're essentially all just clones of a few individuals. One thing I wanted to mention lastly on this slide was that in most cases, these algae in this Cariaceae family are well known to spread by waterfowl consuming the mature reproductive structures and then depositing them somewhere else. But in the case of Starry Stonewort, since we don't have females here, there is no sexual reproduction taking place, and therefore there are no seeds, if you will, of these algae being produced and able to be transported by waterfowl. So the only way that it's spreading around is by fragments of itself or bulbils being attached to something and spread that way. Again, the most likely vector is a boat trailer, or probably even more likely is an anchor. If somebody were to drop that off of the boat and pick up some sediments from the bottom of the lake, it could contain fragments of the plant, or it could contain many bulbils in that sediment as well. So it's incredibly important, if you're on a lake where there may be Starry Stonewort, to rinse that anchor very thoroughly. As soon as that anchor is pulled back up to the boat, just dropping it into the lake a few times to swirl some water across it and rinse it off and clean off all that sediment is incredibly important to minimize any risk of spreading fragments or bulbils of Starry Stonewort around. This is actually a picture from an underwater camera cage that I built a few years ago. This is lowered beneath the ice, and the camera is just sitting on the sediment surface, and there happens to be a bulbil sitting there. So it was a perfect shot. I'm very happy with what I got from that camera. We sort of talked about this already. That's the camera cage that I've been using. One of the questions that we have is, does Starry Stonewort persist under the ice or not? In some cases around the world, Starry Stonewort persists all winter long under the ice cover, and it never really dies back completely. It just sort of goes into this semi-dormant state and then resumes growing as soon as the light intensity is high enough in the springtime. It starts growing right away. In other cases, it completely dies back to the sediments. So when it first showed up in the fall of 2014 in Wisconsin, this was one of the questions that came up. Is this population in Wisconsin going to be persisting through the winter, or is it something that we won't even be able to detect until May or maybe June? So we did go to a couple of these lakes. At the time, it was just one lake in fall of 2014. We went and and dropped the camera down, and that picture from the previous slide, the bulbil sitting there, is from the first lake that was determined to have Starry Stonewort in Wisconsin. That's Little Muskego Lake in Waukesha County. So we quickly started having public meetings with various municipalities as these new populations were being discovered, trying to come up with a plan for attacking these populations. And also doing this under ice monitoring in a few of the lakes, we have found that in all cases that we've observed in Wisconsin, the populations tend to die back basically all the way to the sediment level, with just a few individuals, if any, remaining standing through the wintertime. We've also been doing various kinds of surveys with DNR staff, trying to figure out exactly where this stuff is, surveying lots of other lakes in the areas where it's been found to see if there are other lakes that contain Starry Stonewort. And at this point, we have 5 lakes across the state that have been determined to contain Starry Stonewort. This is just another shot of the camera in action. You can see we got some hybrid water milfoil there in the background. The reason I can say it's hybrid water milfoil is because that lake is known to contain hybrid water milfoil. I could not identify that as hybrid just from the picture. This is a shot again from that camera under the ice. There are 3 individuals of Starry Stonewort there in the left half of the photo. You can see a bulbil sitting on the sediment in the lower right also. So we did see a few individuals still sitting there, but for the most part this area was pretty devoid of most plants during the wintertime. As of August 2015, which is still the current, we did not find anything after August of 2015. So we have 1 population in Long Lake in Racine County, 2 populations in Waukesha County, which is Big Muskego Lake and Little Muskego Lake, and then 2 in Washington County in Pike Lake and Silver Lake. In the Long Lake case, they found a little bit near the boat landing, and then there was a much deeper patch further out in the lake, and they were doing some experimental herbicide treatments out there. Big Muskego also did some experimental treatments out there. The DNR is really trying to figure out what the best option is for Starry Stonewort in Wisconsin. Michigan has not really had a lot of success treating Starry. In most cases it's there, and they do treatments multiple times per year, and it continues to be in these lakes. So they haven't found anything that's been really truly effective at significantly reducing the population or eradicating it from any location. In Little Muskego Lake and in Silver Lake, they've been using a technique called DASH, which stands for Diver Assisted Suction Harvesting. It's basically a barge or a pontoon boat outfitted with some fancy pumps and long hoses, and a diver will take that hose down with them and selectively suck up the target species, in this case Starry Stonewort. And that material is then taken, it's pulled up onto the boat and filtered out through a series of screens. The water is then returned to the lake, and all the material is captured inside these screens, or sometimes tightly woven bags that will allow the water to seep through. And that seems to have been fairly effective. In some of those areas that we looked at this winter through the ice, we are still seeing evidence of Starry Stonewort or bulbils in areas that were targeted with that DASH technique. So we do expect that many of the plants will re-sprout this spring. There's my contact information. If you want to email me photographs of anything, I certainly welcome that, or give me a call if you have other questions.
Thanks for watching this video from the Wisconsin First Detector Network. To learn about our network or to access additional information about invasive species in Wisconsin, please visit our website or contact us.